Going to begin our School District Budget Committee meeting of November 18th, 2021. The first thing on the agenda is the approval of prior minutes. No, don't really. Yes. Could I have a motion for approval of minutes?
I'll move.
Second? Deliberations? Alterations? Recommendations? Changes? Nothing? Okay.
We need to vote.
We don't have anybody online,
Joey
so
was trying.
there's no roll call. Okay. So could we have a show of hands to approve the minutes? We'll let our clerk record that in the affirmative. I have been particularly looking forward to this meeting for a number of different reasons. I'm sorry that we don't have more members in attendance, but such is the case from time to time. All of our other members have been excused because they have been experiencing reasonable requests for an excused absence. I'd like to make kind of an opening monologue, if I might, about this upcoming year before we actually get into the budget review of last year and the general fund balance. We all know that we had a very difficult year in the school district last year. I guess we're not unlike school districts across the country that have experienced a disruption, and we've scrambled in many ways to try and find solutions to solve those problems on the fly, kind of the old expression of building a plane while you're flying it. Although there has been a recent uptick, which may require a change in our masking policy, I think that we can look forward to a very good year. And by all accounts, the beginning of the year has been good. Now, the Budget Committee has a very specific task. While we receive direction from the school board, and we receive the administrative facilitation of the needs of the district, it is our responsibility to make sure that the budget is prudent and meets the needs of our community as we perceive it. That's a very big responsibility. And I take that very seriously because I'm the guy, until somebody replaces me, that actually has to get up and defend the budget at town meeting, at deliberative session. And it is my desire to be as thoroughly involved in the budget as I can be without actually trying to make policy which is the school board's responsibility. But we are here to advise the school board and to apply what influence and cultural understanding that we can to make good decisions for the budget and its future. So it's not a year-by-year thing, but it is a relatively large outlook beyond the horizon. And I'd like to think that this year we can do a better job of that kind of thing. And to that extent, I hope to have some discussion that is robust and full-throated at the end of our presentation for the review of the budget of last year. Reason being that the budget that we're going to be reviewing is open for discussion in any regard. So if we have questions at the end of the review, I would hope that you would articulate them and share them, and we can debate and try to further clarify and understand how meaningful those ideas are, and so on. So I'm hoping that we can really delve into some important considerations that we need to pass along to the school board, I believe. And of course, we're very fortunate tonight. Not only do we have the financial representation of our superintendent of business for the school district, but we have our acting superintendent, Bill Olson. And I must admit, I was a little surprised when I looked up and saw Bill, because that's not normally how things have operated with the Budget Committee and the administration for a number of years. I have to credit Bill and his team because they have recently undertaken a listening tour. Now, as trite as you may think that expression is, that's never taken place in our district previously that I am aware of. And what the administration has done is they have gone to the staff throughout the district and inquired of the staff what their needs, wants, desires, and expectations were relative to crafting an appropriate budget that advances all of the things that the school board would like to see take place. In view of the fact that we don't presently have any school board representation here this evening, I will tell you that I went to the school board meeting last night, and I don't know if any of you had watched it on TV or not. The direction given to the budget considerations overall was that they wanted a level-funded budget for next year. But they also articulated what their really passionate desires were for improvement in the school district. And there were a number of things that they wanted to see happen and undertake, which all require money. So I want to start right off by saying our task ahead of us is considerable, because we are not going to be able to level fund a budget and still meet the vision of the school district, much less the Budget Committee, I believe. If we level funded a budget, just off the top of our heads here, it would be probably $500,000 more than the budget was last year because of increased costs with inflation, with supply chain, with productivity, with all kinds of things. So the world doesn't stand still, it keeps on moving. And it'll be very difficult for us to achieve a level funded budget. But we will take that instruction for its advice, and we will try to craft a budget with the administration and see what we come up with. I have a number of ideas I would like to express later, and we'll have a conversation about those and any other ideas that anybody else would like to have. So, I guess having said all that, and I appreciate the liberty as your chairman to share all that with you, I would now like to introduce Superintendent of Finance, Matt Chevenel, for our annual budget year-end review.
Well, greetings everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's, I don't know how many years in a row that I've been here doing the year-end review. Probably I'm hitting on 20. It's nice to see some of the same people over and over again come and volunteer for this committee. I know the pay is absolutely outstanding, so that's a real attraction for everybody to volunteer. That is a joke if you're listening in the audience. They don't get paid for their work here. So, you know, when you look at the 2021 budget, you have to really kind of think back of at what point in time we were at last year when we first started the year. When we first started the year, we were introducing to the school board our remote learning coordinator, because we were on an A schedule, a B schedule, a C schedule, a D schedule. We had Friday was a flex day. We had remote learning. We had Zoom, meetings going on. We had, cameras in the classroom. One thing we didn't have was a lot of staff. That's what we didn't have. And when you look at this budget, it's really kind of painfully obvious where the surplus came from. The surplus is $8,163,000. Most of that is because of an under-expenditure of the appropriations due to the lack thereof of staff. It was staff, you have benefits, associated benefits with that. So that contributed to it, and we got a little bit more revenue than we had thought we did. We always try and be conservative on our revenue estimates. So those two numbers combined to $8,163,000. Now, when you compare that to last year was around $4.7 million. That's when we hit the March stop school, going into the spring COVID crisis that happened. So that produced a hefty surplus. Normally in years past, in a normal year, we're looking at anything from $2.5 to $3.2 million out of a $78, $80 million budget, which is normal as far as operations are concerned. We build a budget at the table, we defend the budget, and then we try and find any kind of savings along the way that we can garner through bidding, through smart purchasing, through whatever we can do during the course of operationalizing the budget over the course of the year. And we do that keeping in mind that this budget constitutes kind of a contract with the voters of these are the services we're going to provide, and we're going to provide them. And we're not in the business of looking to save money on the back of the promise and the contract we made with the voters. We're here to deliver what we said we were going to deliver. Well, 2021 was an exceedingly challenging year all the way around for everybody, for staff, for students, for the community, for the entire town of Merrimack, and for the entire country. It was really something truly exceptional. So this surplus reflects that. It reflects a lack of assets that we had to work with during the COVID period. And basically, that is the reason for such. So if you go to page 2, you'll look to see that, professional salaries, we saved $1.8 million. Currently, as of this writing, we were 11 people down. I think we're a little bit better right now, but we still have some positions to fill that we haven't filled. And we've looked at other ways of doing that through contracted services, through other avenues, to try and get those positions filled with certified teachers. The people we have who are contractors that we're using, be it from Boothby for special ed or other private contractors from the technology world helping us out with our technology services. You guys all know that Nancy Rose has left us as the technology director. It took a while to find a suitable replacement, although I will say it'll be very hard to fully replace her if that can be done. But, we're going to go on, and we finally made a hire that's going to be starting shortly. We also lost our Power School person. That was the person who ran the system, that, made the report cards, that did all the scheduling. And so we had to cobble together a series of contractors and other people and brought in a retiree to work. So we had 3 people doing the job of one in a part-time fashion. So there were some challenges. So with the professional staff, there was a big savings there. The retirements were up. People wanted to, I believe, and I can say this, during the COVID period, it was rather rough, not teach anymore. And if they were close to retirement age, they chose that. And that's their prerogative, and then that's exactly what happened. Support staff, we had a tremendous time with support staff. We were 20, 30 paras short, paraprofessionals, 10 custodians, food service workers, clerical positions. I don't need my glasses. I know what this says. They're fogging up on me. And we had a lot of people who we just couldn't hire. My office, myself, was down at least 2 people during that period, and it was rough. But what do? We get through it. We work harder. We get through it. So that's basically the savings. We had a savings in health insurance because when you don't have people who take benefits, when you're down around 40 to 50 staff members, you have 40 or 50 staff members who aren't buying health insurance. So there's an automatic savings, if you want to call it that, that's just generated because of the lack of personnel. We also had a guaranteed maximum rate that was less than what the actual rate was by a couple of points. So that added to that savings, surplus. Maintenance, when you don't have kids in your schools and you're not creating a lot of trash, well, you don't have the trash bill of around $70,000. It's more like maybe $20,000. So little things like that, you did save money. As far as cleaning supplies and everything like that, we didn't scrimp on that, but we purchased those out of the CARES Act money. The fogging that was going on every single night in the evening throughout the year, the PPE that we bought, the disinfectant wipes. We probably spent $150,000 on disinfectant wipes. That didn't come out of the general fund. That came out of the CARES money from the federal government. So that produced a bit of a surplus in maintenance. Special services, out-of-district placements. people weren't taking kids anymore. We had to find alternative services for them. A lot of these out-of-district placements and subsequently the transportation needed to get them to and fro, they were shut down. We didn't have the opportunity. This summer, through compensatory services, we cashed in a rain check on a promise that we made back in 2021 that we would make good by what we said we were going to do according to the child's IEP. So there was a hell of a lot of work going on during the summertime to try and do make-up work with these kids, seeing that we now have been back in school for a bit. Contracted services and staff development, one of the things is, driver's ed. We had driver's ed in the budget. Driver's ed was shut down. There was no driver ed program here because you couldn't ride in a car with a student. Governor shut it down. So that just totally went away. There weren't any professional development opportunities. There were no conferences to go to. There was nothing to go to. And so you'll see that reflected in the budget. The equipment repairs line, we took advantage of and I'll talk to that a little bit later, about with a donation from the trustee of trust funds to do some work that we needed to get done. So we didn't spend it out of the general fund. We used the Master Cola fund in order to get those projects done and finished. And then you look at transportation. Well, we were running buses every single day. We were delivering lunches. We were doing the A routes, the B routes, everything like that, but we weren't doing the full run as we do now. And so there was a fuel savings there. And then if you go through all the detail, you look at every single field trip line, and those are almost non-existent because every place was shut down. If you had a field trip going to Strawberry Bank in Portsmouth, guess what? Wasn't open, wasn't there, wasn't available. So that was another area where the savings came into effect. The other one is just, a minor savings, postage, travel, telephone. And then on page 3, you look at, we kind of fall more in line with supplies, textbooks. Software, we went over a little bit because we were purchasing software out of the operating budget to support the hybrid model. Everything else is pretty much on target. We did, however, have to transfer $149,000 out of the general fund and into the food service fund to balance the books on the food service program, because we were doing the Seamless Summer Food Program all summer long. Dave Zicki, our food service director, was out there with lunches. Families were picking them up. We had STA, our bus company, who was actually delivering meals around town to families, and that was at no charge. But we did get reimbursed by the federal government. State government, not so much, but the federal government, yes. But we got reimbursed to the tune of $3.53 a meal, when our actual cost is more like $1.50 more than that. Even though that's not what we charge, we make a lot of money at the high school off of a la carte menus. And when you're just doing basics and you're getting reimbursed for basics, you're not generating the revenue to make the food service fund self-supporting. So it needed an infusion from the general fund of $150,000. And then lastly, we had bonded debt, and like every single year, we usually have a savings in the interest rate because interest rates on bonded debt had gone down. As far as the revenue components, the $790,000, Medicaid, that's always a wild card. You put in for it, you're really not sure what you're going to get because the legislature likes to keep you on pins and needles as far as what you're actually going to be receiving. I think it all is dependent upon how much they get as to how much they give you. We know how much we're entitled to, but we never get what we're fully entitled to. So that's something that we always estimate low, as is the special education aid too. That's the catastrophic aid. We used to call it catastrophic aid. Some of you guys who've been around for a little bit are familiar with that term. It's now called special education aid. So when we're given a figure from the Department of Ed, they give us a range. You know, you may get 90% of your allotment. You may get 70% of your allotment. What do you want to gamble with? Well, we always pick the low one. And if we get more, great. We have it for surplus. We return it to reduce the tax rate. So when you look at all of this, last year there was $4.7 million that was used to reduce the school portion of the tax rate. So that tax rate went down by 35 cents a thousand. This year it's 8.1, so we expect, you know, to go down another probably 35 cents. So in 2 tax bills, the school rate's probably gone down like 70, 75 cents a thousand. Whether or not that's reflected in your actual tax bill, that's up to what the revaluation of your property is and how that's been dispersed around town. There were some years where we put in a pretty darn close level funded budget with the amount of surplus that we had to reduce the taxes, and taxes went up for the homeowners because condos were devalued, single-family homes went up at a higher rate than commercial industrial. So there was a shift in where the money is coming from. So what you're paying is obviously a function of how much money we are asking to support the schools and to support the town, but it's also a function of how the assessed valuations are configured in your town as to who is bearing the burden, and sometimes that shifts. I know recently my house appreciated $100,000 in the matter of a year. That's fantastic. I'm going to sell. I'm rich, right? Well, no, not really. You know, is that a real value that's going to carry on for the next 5, 10 years? Probably not. So at some point, it's going to come down. And maybe condos will go up because more people are looking for condos. You know, maybe the taxes on all the apartments that are being built in town will go up, and then the landlords will have to raise their rent. So it's a function of a couple of things, and you can't peg it on just one item. But the major player is, of course, the amount of money we want to raise for the school, for the support of schools, and for the support of the town. Now, the school basically doesn't have a lot of revenue sources. There's the Adequate Education Grant that we had. It was around, for this year, it's like 9.4. For next year, I have a preliminary document that says it's going to be 10.4. It's going to be $1 million more, supposedly. But that always changes. You know, that always changes. As we get closer to the deliberative session, that number will fluctuate. They'll put out a Rev 2, the state will put out maybe a Rev 3, and then we won't know exactly what we're going to get for adequacy until it's time to set the tax rate in October. Those numbers can fluctuate. Right now, we're looking good. 6 months from now, I don't know what we could look like. It's all dependent on the formula they're using, which sometimes, in my humble opinion, they take a number that they have to spend and they adjust the formula to back into that number, and that's what you get. But that's my personal opinion from 25 years of dealing with this and looking at state finances and how the adequacy funding model works here. So we have the budget. We have the food service budget. We can look at the detail if you like, but I want to go forward for a second. So if you could go to the second to the last page, page 26. This is, seeing we're talking about budgeting, and we've just kind of, for the time being, closed the door on 2021. We got to look forward to 22-23, which is going to be the budget development. And you heard Mr. Mower talk about, the school district budget message, looking for a level-funded budget. But they also said in their budget message they want to have funds available for social emotional learning. They want to keep with our technology plan. They want to not ignore our infrastructure and a few other things that are going to be costly. So this is the capital improvement plan that we presented to the board this past Monday night, and it was approved by the School District Planning and Building Committee on November 9th. And the first thing you see there is a roof at Thornton's Ferry for $1.6 million. We have not done a roof in this district since we did the middle school roof for $1 million 4 years ago, 4 years ago maybe. And so we've kind of deferred these issues. And the board is well aware of it, and we have discussed it with them, and we've said, yeah, we can get through another year. But now I think we're at a spot where we can't make that statement anymore. So this roof over here, it's showing signs that it could be compromised as far as the insulation goes. Granted, it's a built-up roof. It's not like shingles on your house or just a rubber membrane. It's a built-up roof with insulation value. We have to have insulation value per code because you've got a corrugated metal deck and this fits right on top of it. And there could be wet insulation. And when you have wet insulation, if you don't take care of that issue, that can give you other issues that you don't want to go or experience in the future. So that is going to be something that's going to be discussed at the school board level to see if perhaps there's a warrant article forthcoming for it. It can't fit in the operating budget. There's not enough room. So that's going to be something that we'll be looking at. And then you can see, as we go out 10 years, what we have to look forward to in the future. And these items, depending upon the walkthroughs that Tom Tussaud goes through, the not contractors, but the independent roofing consultants that we have brought in that are used by a multitude of school districts in this area to evaluate our roofing plan to see if we're on the right track, are kind of in agreement with for now. But there could be something catastrophic in the future which is going to flip one of these closer and another one further out. But right now we are fairly confident that Thornton's Ferry is the one that we're looking at. And if you turn the page, you can see the sections that we're talking about. Back in the 90s, mid-90s, this roof was overlaid on the original roof that was done in 1974, 1975. So they didn't bother taking up the 74, 75 roof. They just in 94 put another roof on top of it. So this is the these are the sections of the roof that we're looking at replacing. And this basically is essentially part of the original construction of the school when Thornton's and Reed's were done back in the 70s. The two wings on the side that kind of closed the H off, those were like the 1997 additions. But this is what we're talking about, probably 39,000 square feet, and the cost has gone up too. Last year we were doing $30 a square. We're at like $40 a square right now before you get out of the gate. Hopefully that's enough money. in there for a budget figure. We think it is. But if this turns into a warrant article, and if it goes to a vote, we'll be bidding it out in December, even before the vote, contingent upon the vote passing, to see if we can lock in a price. Sometimes if you bid things out, people are uncertain, and they'll bid a little bit higher. So we'll see what the numbers come in at, and if we have to bid it out a second time because we don't like our first round of numbers, we'll do that again too. So that's how we take a look at our roofing. Ventilation, the next item down there, you remember that was an issue. There was a warrant article for a lease purchase for $4 million that passed last April. We spread that over 10 years. We were first planning on doing $400,000 a year. We do a couple unit ventilators here, a couple unit ventilators there. But the board says, why don't we try a lease purchase? Interest rates are really low. So we financed 10 years, $4 million. It was a 1.55% interest rate from TD Bank. We bid out that too. TD Bank was the lowest at 1.55, and another bank came in around 2.25 or something like that. That was the higher bid. So we said at the deliberative session that we were going to install maybe around 55, 56 unit ventilators. We're up to, once we're operationalizing that and putting the construction program together and doing the actual work, we're up to around 61. We'll probably be a little bit more than that. It all depends on the cost of raw materials and everything coming in. Again, it's a supply chain. This is something we wanted to do and just knock it out of the park this summer, but we couldn't get product. We couldn't get the unit ventilators. For a while, they were stuck at the border, and then they were stuck in Texas for a month because we couldn't get truck drivers to drive them up from Texas to New Hampshire. And this is Honeywell we're talking about. This isn't some little tiny company. They couldn't get truck drivers to drive the unit ventilators up here to install them in our classrooms. So this is to provide increased ventilation. It's to lower the CO2 levels in the classrooms that were identified. I think it was a brilliant move on the part of the school board to take advantage of some cheap money and do a finance on this thing and really make an impact all at once before the prices escalate even further. It's tough to see what the future holds, but I can't think that things are going to cost less in another year or two. I think they're going to cost a bit more. So that's something that's finished. It's in process, but I wanted to just show it on there to remind you of what we did. The next item is we've been talking about doing a sidewalk and paving O'Gara Drive for a very long time. And so O'Gara Drive is at a level right now where we think it really needs to be done. We want to do that sidewalk on O'Gara Drive, taking it from where the high school parking lot is all the way down to Babusick Lake Road, perhaps that long. We'll see, because we're also involved in a master plan with Steve Keach. Steve has met with Tom and I. Steve has gotten input from the principals who live here in this complex, as well as thoughts and ideas from Jay Muse and Massacola Elementary School. And we had a meeting at the School District Planning and Building Committee. Mr. Albuquerque was there. Yep, there he is. And I think we had a pretty good discussion with Steve. I enjoy his knowledge and his insight, how to take this campus and make it functional from a traffic and flow point of view, and to also give it some presence. So when you drive up, you know you're at Merrimack High School. You know, right now you drive up and you see guardrails, you see wires, you see asphalt all over the place. You see buses going around the buildings, you see kids in their cars trying to get out of O'Gara, backing the buses up to that corner of the building right there. You see parents patiently waiting in their vehicles parked in the superintendent's office on the front lawn sometimes, waiting to pick up their kids. It doesn't work. The traffic pattern and flow doesn't work. I remember when there was 1,700 kids in this school, and there's now a little over 1,200. I'll tell you, there must be more kids driving now than there was back then. You know, every individual has a motor vehicle, but there are a lot of cars here, both faculty and students. And that's fine because we have parking for them, but we have to figure out how to move them out of here a little more graciously than they're moving right now, because it doesn't work. So we're going to be looking at that and reviewing that. I left the bleachers on here because the JMU's bleachers, those were the ones in the all-purpose room. When you go to vote, deliberative session, we replaced those. We replaced the floor that the nail heads were showing on it in the all-purpose room where you go to vote. That was done with money from the trustees of trust funds, so it didn't utilize any taxpayer funding. We also replaced the bleachers in the Smith Gym. Those are the ones that were oak and they went up like 8 stories. No handrails, nothing like that. It was difficult to get up and down those bleachers. No ADA compliance, no wheelchair accessibility spots cut into them so you could place a wheelchair. Person in a wheelchair would have to sit by the doorway off to the side as opposed to being part of the audience. So now those have all been replaced and that's all been taken care of through the Master Cola Fund and the willingness of the trustees of trust funds to listen to us and to hear what we had to say and to approve the project. At that time, it was Bill Wilkes, it was Chris Christensen, and the late Jack Balcom. It just kind of makes me a little bit sad that Jack passed away before we had the opportunity to unveil this project, because I'm certain he would have been exceedingly pleased as a lifelong supporter of the Merrimack School District and former school board member who I first served with when I came here a couple of decades ago. So, and we do have some other items out in the far right of the columns. Some boilers, some windows, etc. So I just wanted to, because this is going to have budget implications, or we believe it will, I wanted to take a little bit of time to go over this with you so you could kind of get an understanding and get kind of a leg up. So when the budget's finally brought to you and you see it, or you listen to discussions going on between the board and administration back and forth, you kind of have an idea of what's going on. So I know I covered a lot of material here. Some of it you probably found really exciting. Some of it you probably found exceedingly boring. But the bottom line is we have a large surplus because of COVID-related issues, due to staffing, due to the lack thereof, and we have a capital improvement plan that we think will aid us in the future in taking care of our building infrastructure and put us on the proper path for a master plan, which maybe you're not going to see a large appropriation for that soon. Maybe it's going to be spread out. You know, who knows what it's going to be. But whatever it's going to be, we're going to involve the school board, we're going to involve the community, we're going to involve the town center committee in which I sit on, we're going to involve everybody we can into the process. But we're just kicking it off right now, getting it going. Hopefully it'll be something that the town can be proud of, and even if it just remains on a piece of paper for 20 years, whatever, you know, you'll have something. You'll have a piece of documentation that you can look at and say, you know, I really appreciate the work that was done back then. This is still viable today. Let's take a look at it. The time is right. It all depends when the timing is right. You know, we will drink no wine before it's time. If anybody could tell me what the brand of wine was, get an extra point, I guess. I think it was, whatever, I'm not even going to speculate. I'm just being ridiculous right now. So are there any questions, concerns, comments?
Thank you very much, Matt.
Yeah.
I think that was a pretty thorough overview of what we've experienced and some vision about where we hope we can go. Before I open it up to a more robust back and forth between the members of the committee and you, I'd like to take this opportunity, if I could, to invite the superintendent, Bill Olson, to come up and share with us his unusual approach relative to his listening tour, and I think members of the committee will find it very interesting.
See, now I'm feeling a little bit more relaxed because I got the big boss over here, you know.
And I'd like to extend a welcome on behalf of the Budget Committee. This is your first session with the Merrimack District Budget Committee, so welcome aboard.
Yes, it is, and it's a pleasure to meet everyone. Hope to meet you at the end of the meeting. This is my 17th year in the position of superintendent. What I learned many years ago is that if you want to know how to improve a school system, you don't read it out of a textbook, particularly a textbook that's been authored by a person who has probably not been in the classroom before, hasn't been in the classroom in the last 20 or 30 years, and has no interest in public education, because those people are out there. I go to the practitioners. I go to the people who we pay to teach children day in and day out, because they know what the needs, what the dispositions, the temperaments, the skills, the passions of each child is. And that is very important. I asked them, what is it that's working? What's working well in the classroom? What's promoting student learning? What's assisting in a student's social emotional adjustment to his or her peers and to the school setting in general? I asked them to give me suggestions for improving the school system, for improving opportunities for children, whether it's curriculum, instructional practice, whether it's a need of professional development, whether it's provisioning, and that by that I mean including more or better or different types of materials and supplies. What is it that they need in terms of the ability, as I said, to engage in professional development? Because every company, private sector company, spends millions every year invested in training their employees. And we should be no different, because there are new methods, new techniques, new curriculum, new instructional practice, new research that comes out every year. Some more valid, obviously, than other research. But the practitioners are always in tune with what the children need. And that's the significance of it. And so we've gone around, Matt and Kim Yalot, our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, and I have gone around to meet with the staff of each school. They appreciate it. You see, it gives us important information in terms of where to go in the future, what's working, what's not working. But it also provides them a message that we care about what they do, because everyone in the school system matters. Everyone plays a role in the development of a child. And I don't care whether that person is a teacher, a paraprofessional, a custodian, a cafeteria worker, a nurse. Everyone is on a level keel from my perspective in terms of importance and the significance that they play in the effectiveness of this organization. And so I had a nice comment from a teacher at Thornton's Ferry back about 3 weeks ago. And after the listening session that we had, she came up to me and she said, you know, this is the first time that someone has come over to listen to us and ask us our opinions. And that's very important to me, because I hope that, now I'm here for 1 year, but I hope that this continues, and I know Matt will continue that in the future, to involve those staff members who we pay day in and day out, who show up day in and day out, and work with children, and it's not getting any easier, I can tell you that. And so those conversations have great benefit. We'll talk with parents also during the budget process, because they're a very important source of input also. We talk with everyone. We'll talk with the custodians. We'll talk, we'll talk with the food service workers, some of the unsung heroes of the school system. So we want everyone to know that we appreciate what they do, we understand what they do, we care about what they do, and their opinions and their insight and their perspective are extraordinarily important, because they are at ground zero with the children every day. And I'll stop talking, but I get passionate about it because it's important to listen to the employees and listen to the professionals who work with our children day in and day out. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions from the committee for the superintendent? Carol? No, push the... Here, try this one.
Okay, that one's working.
A
Did
little
you-
closer, Carol.
And Carol, if you can, I can ask you to talk fairly loud, because I have no hearing in this ear, so.
Okay, I'll do my best. Did you get a sense overall of any areas where staff feels like, from a budget perspective, we're either not meeting their needs or spending more than necessary, anything where they felt like we were out of sync with their needs?
I think the staff in general were quite pleased with our ability to meet their needs. Matt and the prior administration and school boards have done, I think, an excellent job, because what I've found in Merrimack is the classrooms are very well provisioned. Lots of materials and supplies, lots of manipulatives that are used in education. Special education, as we know, will always be a challenge, and is very variable in terms of the numbers of children who are identified for services. There is some request, not a significant request in terms of numbers, but here and there, a request for some additional paraprofessionals or a special education teacher. And those requests can vary even by building, certainly. One of the things that the staff particularly was positive about is our class sizes, because a lot of research has shown that the effectiveness and the learning of children in school depends on A, the quality of teacher, and B, actually three things: quality of the teacher, the size of the school in terms of population, and also class size. Getting to know the students and being able to connect with them with relatively smaller class sizes than larger class sizes. They were all expressing a desire for more professional development when it comes to technology. You know, we recognized about 30 years ago when Tandy Corporation, Commodore, Wang Laboratories, Digital Equipment, IBM, and others were part of the mix of companies with technology that eventually shook itself out into Apple and several other major competitors now. We understood that that was going to be a never-ending entity of expenditures. And And that will continue into the future with putting devices in front of most, if not all, children, with a responsible 5-year, 4 or 5 or 6-year replacement cycle as they age. The teachers would like some additional professional development among all other things with technology, because this is still an area where sometimes we don't know what we don't know. That some of our veteran staff who didn't necessarily grow up with technology, even some of our newest staff, are always interested in applications that can be used in terms of language arts or mathematics or science to enhance the instructional process, to enhance the learning experience, I should say, of children. One of the things I'd like to work on is continuing to develop an innovative mindset among the staff and the students. I've done some research in creative thinking and innovation in corporations. It's interesting because a lot of people think that's an innate ability, that you're born with that. Well, you can be taught various skills. There are 5 basic skills that can be taught to staff members and students to develop their level of innovative thinking, because we know that innovation is the key, sustained innovation is the key to economic viability of this nation now and moving forward. And so that's an area that we want to take a look at. But for the most part, I was very pleased to hear that the staff is happy with how the classrooms are provisioned with supplies, that they have technology. We're increasing the amount of professional development. The social emotional wellness of students is an increasing and rapidly increasing issue that we need to continue to effectively address. The number of issues with children, behavioral issues, and the severity of them continues to increase each year. Whether it's anxiety, depression, mental disorders mental health disorders of all types. Children are either acting out, which manifests their issues, or they withdraw, which is equally concerning. And we need to know about what's going on with them, what's going on in their lives. And so that's an area that we need to address. What we're finding is coming out of COVID also. Children are taking some time. It's taking some time to readjust to connecting with each other. It's like we have removed everyone from life for a year, and now just reintroducing it to them in some regards. Now, some children, have had no adjustment issues, but some have. We want to do more in terms of, obviously, suicide prevention at the upper grade levels. So there were a number of things. I started here on July 16th, and so, picking up on that expression I used a few minutes ago, there's still a lot that I don't know in Merrimack. But I will say Matt is one of the most astute school business officials and operations people I've ever had an opportunity to work with, and so wasn't Kim, in terms of Kim Yalot, in terms of curriculum and instruction. So it's a pleasure working here. It's a pleasure working with excellent, highly qualified people. So I didn't mean to be long-winded, but I have to say I've been very impressed with what I've observed in the Merrimack School District and the town in general. Wonderful people in the town and wonderful people within the school system.
Bill, if I may just kind of add on, relative to last night's school board meeting, there was a report by the committee that has been working on reporting standards and curriculum standards. With some success, they have created the first change for the reporting standards for the first 6 grades. So there's some work yet to do, and of course, they need to be accompanied by curriculum standards as well. This, I believe, is an attempt to reinforce the competency assessment that we've been trying to achieve for several years now, and quite frankly was wreaked havoc upon with COVID. So there wasn't really any ability to consistently evaluate across the board in the district how we apply competency assessment. And I was very pleased to hear their work, and it was well received by the school board, and of course that also requires professional training, which means we're going to have to spend some money to ensure that that those evaluations are meaningful and measurable. So it's one more thing that is going to be required financially to be supported for our basic assessment system to have merit and value.
They have done an outstanding job to this point in time.
I hope I didn't misrepresent that in any
No,
way.
not at all. And they will continue to do an outstanding job. And transitioning from a traditional grading system to standards-based is not easily accomplished because it does involve professional development of your own staff, but equally, if not more importantly, it involves communication with the parents and the community in terms of what this now means in terms of a child's progress in education. You know, one of the things that I failed to mention also that was begun, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but sort of a reimagining of the Merrimack School District. There was some terrific work done in terms of visioning and beginning to address a strategic plan, and I think that's something that needs to continue that work, working on I'd say a 3-year strategic plan. You know, most organizations and school systems used to engage in a 5 to 10-year strategic plan. Those are meaningless timeframes because so much changes beyond 3 years that you need to really retool after that. So, you know, the horizon for a real valid strategic plan should be no more than 3 years. And so that helps the community understand, helps you understand also what type of orientation this school district will be taking within the next several years, what type of financial commitment it may take, and what the expected outcomes might be for students.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to engage in conversation with you. We can't let Matt go.
It's true.
Where are you going?
Well, I'll stay here.
It's not often you can talk to your boss like that. He actually laughs at you, you know.
So now we have an opportunity to have a more excited give and take here with the superintendency relative to the information that he provided for us this evening in the review. So anything that a member would like to bring up? I certainly have a lot that I'd like to bring up and hope inspires some discussion, but I'll open it up to the board first. Carol.
Yeah, I have several things. I'll try to keep them as brief as I can. We mentioned in the opening that the school board had been talking about a level-funded budget, and I was looking if either of you could give me some more clarity whether they were really looking for a level-funded budget or if they were more looking for a level services budget, which to me is a little more rational. So I'm wondering what both of your sense is on that.
There is quite a difference between a level-funded and a level-service budget. Level-funded obviously isn't necessarily able to capture the advancement of salaries, of contract costs, of inflationary pressures in terms of utilities, transportation contracts, special education. So level services, however, is, as we know, taking what we have, moving it forward, indexing it upwards at either the, contract negotiated rates or newly bid rates, rates that pertain to special education tuitions. And so there is a big difference. Certainly my focus has always been on at least the level services budget.
Is it your sense that the school board would agree with you on that?
I'm not sure at this point in time because I haven't engaged them in conversation to that
Okay.
extent.
Fair enough. This one is probably for Matt because I think it precedes you. I know we've been so busy with COVID, nothing else has had time to reach the top of the pile, but do we have any sense of when we're ever going to address the issue with the blue building?
With the blue building or the red building?
Sorry, red.
Yeah. I am a little bit colorblind, but I know the difference
And
between
my
blue.
mind just kind of
I
skipped a
intrinsically knew which building
Yep,
you were talking
you
about.
knew, yep.
Yeah, we are definitely going to bring that up in conversation as far as what the final disposition of that building should be. And that's going to be part of the recommendations, probably coming a little bit sooner than later, that may or may not have a budgetary impact for this coming year or the year after. But there has to be something done with that facility, because
My
right now...
concern is you're still talking about an overall plan being developed, and that could hang things up for another year or two.
Correct.
And we've been on hold already for a couple of years, and it's
Yeah.
like, how long do we have to wait?
Yeah, I remember Lee French had a petition warrant article to
Right.
take it down, and that did not pass. But
Right.
at some point in time, it just makes so much logical sense for long-range planning, short-range planning. If I could do it tomorrow, I would do it. But this is something that the board's going to have to make a final disposition on. Right now, I know the police department is using it for canine training, and those dogs, they just love going in there, and they're having a grand old time. But that's the only function that it's serving right now.
Right. My next question is the ventilation that was added. I know you said its primary purpose was to reduce the CO2 levels, but was it also to hopefully mitigate COVID?
It wasn't built on the back, nor promises were made that it was the answer to mitigating COVID. It was primarily because of CO2 levels in the classroom. However, when you exchange air, you're automatically going to be introducing tempered fresh air into the environment, which will help with the transmission or the presence of COVID in the classroom. So as a side benefit, yes, it's going to help with that. It has helped with that in the rooms we've done it, but the primary focus was, when we first discussed it, CO2 levels.
Okay. And then my last question is, now that we have our kids primarily back in the classroom, what's become of all those Chromebooks we had to buy?
Oh, they're still, are you kidding me? They're using them now. That's one thing that, you can interject anytime you want. That is one, sometimes you're dealt a bad hand, right? COVID was a bad hand. But sometimes out of that bad hand comes some really good things. COVID was the impetus to push us into a more digital learning environment with both staff and, more importantly, with students. So our goal still is one-to-one devices for every single student in this school district, and we're pretty darn close to it. We're in the process of taking some devices that we currently have and refreshing them because they were bought 3 to 4 years ago.
Right.
And a Chromebook is like $250 right now,
Right.
and so we're going to be purchasing. So that is not going to slow down. Those things we're going to continue. We're going to feather them down to the lower grades, which they're getting there already, and because we adopted last September, August, Canvas, which is a learning management system, which is a plug-in to PowerSchool. That makes it much easier for the transference of assignments to students, no matter what age they are, and the ability of parents to see what those assignments are and see what the outcome of those assignments
Sure.
are. So the Chromebooks or whatever devices we get, Chromebooks really work well with a web-based platform like PowerSchool and a web-based platform that plugs directly into PowerSchool called Canvas, which was purchased by the state of New Hampshire and was actually free for us. So that's only going to continue.
Are you finding, are there some students who own their own laptops who just stick to that, therefore freeing up more Chromebooks for other students?
I think that the majority of those are using the devices that we give them if they're in decent shape. I don't have any firm data on those bringing their own devices. I think we prefer them using devices that we give them. That doesn't preclude them from using their own. But because when we give them devices and they use them, we can better track and monitor the devices, where they are, the location, everything like that. So it's to our benefit and to their benefit. Unless they're doing, if you're a high school kid and you're doing something high-end and you need the client version of Excel to do 27 pivot tables all over the place, and you know, then you're going to want to use your own device to get a higher-end device.
Right.
And maybe that's worth it because you're going to use it in college anyway.
Right.
But we prefer to, use the devices we give you. They're more than adequate for the job. It's all a web-based platform, and it integrates with PowerSchool and everything like that, because PowerSchool's web-based, so,
Okay, great, thank you.
yeah.
Brian?
So, first of all, if you could briefly clarify, you mentioned the reassessment of property values and the formulas used for that. And could you just briefly clarify on where those formulas come from and who drives the assessment?
Well, the town of Merrimack has an assessing department, and they have a company, I don't know if it's Avatar or something like that. That's what we used to use when I was working on the town side. But, that's not I'm just talking because I've had experience in that area, so I just wanted to share what little I remember from a long time ago. But that is essentially a town function, and it is of the assessing department and their contracted assessor, whoever does that work, and I'm sure they do a tremendous job.
Okay. And in terms of those formulas, are those derived by the town, or are those mandated or prescribed by the state?
Quite frankly, when back in the day, it was a formula that was essentially driven by the town and certain parameters set up as best practices for assessing companies using proven metrics, just as if you were a mechanical engineer or something like that. So I can't tell you specifically, but that's the way it used to be.
So there's not a rigid formula from the state, but the state promulgates best practices, and then the town conducts the assessment based on those practices.
Absolutely.
And the school district has no role in that assessment?
No.
Okay. And then you mentioned the roof at Thornton's Ferry, and you mentioned, if I understood correctly, I think I heard you say that you would like to see that be in the budget, because that will allow us to put it out to bid sooner to lock in a price potentially before it goes up?
No. There is not, if the goal usually is, and you guys know this, is to come in with a budget that's hovering around the default budget. This isn't going to be a year where we're going to present a budget that's going to be below default. It's going to be above default. So I believe we're going to give the people something to vote on, but that's up to the board, obviously. And so for something like this, this would probably more than likely be an individual warrant article on the ballot for people to vote on. If they want to vote yes, they can vote yes. If they want to vote no, they can vote no.
Okay.
We'll just present the facts.
Anybody
then-
else?
Yeah, I also wanted to ask
Oh,
about.
I'm sorry.
The summer lunch program that you talked about, is that still planned to continue going forward, or was that purely for the previous summer?
I think for this summer coming up, I don't, we had a real lack of participation in it towards the waning couple of weeks or months of the summertime. And so I think it's something that's going to go by the wayside unless there is a public demand for it to continue. That was, basically to serve the community in kind of a crisis mode where people were experiencing perhaps food insecurity, where you couldn't, where the shelves you'd go in to buy, whatever, and you can't find it on the shelves. So that was to take care of a need, and I don't think, from talking to Dave and from seeing the people who were in the line and whatnot, the line really kind of dissipated towards the end of the year. So I don't believe that's gonna happen this coming summer.
Okay, but that's being driven by a lack of demand, not by budgetary
Correct,
considerations? Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, Scott?
Matt, a couple questions on the capital improvement plan.
Yeah.
On the roof for Thornton's Ferry at 1.6 million, where does that figure come from?
It's around 30, almost 40,000 square feet. So you take all those sections on the map that I have, and you add them up. I think they come to around that, and we're using around $41 a square foot for an estimate. And that estimate came from, this is going to sound silly, I don't know the company's name we've been dealing, but Larry, who owns the company, who
Okay.
is our contracted roof inspector and advisor, who's not affiliated with any roofing manufacturer or anything like that, so that's where that comes from.
So whether this is in the budget or if it passes on a warrant article, the work would take place over the summer of,
2022.
is
Right
there,
when the kids get out of school,
Yeah.
we'd be up on that Thornton's Ferry roof.
But if it goes to a warrant article, it can't happen until after fall.
so if it goes to a warrant article, it can't happen until,
You have to wait until the April vote
right?
in the second Tuesday in April, right? Second Tuesday in April in 2022, that would be the vote on the budget.
Right.
And the vote on any warrant articles. So you'd have to wait until those pass. And if they were to pass and this were to be a warrant article, then we would bid it out before then in anticipation.
Right?
Because you have to, especially nowadays, get your foot in the door really early for any construction you want to do, or else you're out of luck. And so we would bid it out early contingent upon it passing. And so it would be done, because everybody wants to do roofs in the summer, especially school districts, right?
Right.
Because that's when you have the opportunity to do them. And so then it would be done in the summer of 2022.
So regardless of whether it's in the budget or if it's a warrant article, it will still be done about the same time?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Where it sits
Okay.
in the operating budget
Right?
versus warrant article does not impact when it'll be done.
Okay. The other question or concern I would have is, gosh, what's going to happen with the pricing, right? I mean, everything's going up. My fear, and again, this is my own ignorance, is if we come in with a warrant article of, say, 1.7 million, and suddenly that's not enough because of inflation, the cost of doing this, et cetera, how do we mitigate that?
Well, maybe we look at the map and you see sections C, D, you see all the sections. I don't know if this is blue or green or whatever the heck color this is. I know there are 2 courtyards, there's grass there, so there's no roof,
Right.
So maybe we look at, okay, we don't have enough money to do all these sections.
Okay.
But because these are individually divided sections.
Okay.
You can say, we'll do a patch job on this one, just to get us through for a
Perfect.
couple of years, but we'll do the other ones full bore.
Okay, perfect. That
Yeah.
makes great sense. Thank you. The other question I have is on the paving for O'Gara Drive and the sidewalk. How does the master plan potentially affect that? If this is done coming up this summer, and we proceed with doing something else in the master plan, are we getting ahead of ourselves by potentially paving or putting a sidewalk in?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and one we asked. I believe O'Gara Drive is going to be where O'Gara Drive is, regardless of anything. There's no more creativity you could do to get traffic around this loop than to have McElwain coming in, going back around the high school, and going out O'Gara. There's a couple of wild card factors in there, and talking with DPW. When they widen the highway and they do the bridge over Babusick Lake Road, they're going to widen that up. In talking with DPW, they may be looking at putting in a turn lane going into O'Gara Drive, coming from that way to this way here. So that may impact it, but that's a few years out. So we may look at not doing, we know we want to do the road, we know we want to do a portion of the sidewalk. We may not do the sidewalk in front of where the skate park is at that point in time because there's a variable there.
Okay,
So we may defer that.
got it. But the rest of it,
Rest of it
regardless,
is
almost regardless of what we do, it'll still,
Yes.
we're not spending money and then having to tear it back up.
No.
Okay, great. I believe that's all my questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Anybody else? Well, I hope we can have a lot of discussion about what I'm going to bring up. And I'd like to bring up an individual example and then talk about a lot of other examples that we really need to focus on in warrant articles to help save money for the district. But the first thing I'd like to bring up in regard to the Budget Committee asking the school board to support these kinds of warrant articles would be that recently the Merrimack Historical Society has been given the opportunity to occupy one of the school buildings at 10 Depot Street, the old PTA kindergarten, which was the site of our original high school. So, of course, the Historical Society and the school district, in creating this arrangement, there was a lot of research done and so forth. And it came to our attention that Robert McGaw, who started the corporation of the McGaw Normal Institute, which was a teacher's college in its day, amongst other things, and became our first high school. Robert McGaw was a great contributor to early Merrimack. But nobody knows who Robert McGaw is. We all know who Abby Griffin is, and so many other people who left trust funds to the community for the purposes of public support. But in the covenant of Robert McGaw's will, there was a $10,000 amount of money that should the McGaw Normal Institute cease to exist, it would be returned to Dartmouth College. And the disposition of this, as we understand it presently, is that all these years, when the town took over the McGaw Normal Institute and made it our high school, it was carried over in the operating budget. And it's essentially still carried over in the operating budget. And so I would like to propose that we support asking the selectmen, the school board, to put up a warrant article that would transfer $10,000 from the operating fund and establish it in the hands of the trustees of trust funds for the specific purpose of education that it was always intended to be, and recognize his gift and his contribution as we have for so many other individuals. Anybody want to respond to that in some way? Yes,
Is there any person?
close to the microphone.
Is there any person who is currently, for lack of a better word, an administrator for that estate that we could get some input from?
Well, it's wholly within the authority and the administration of the Merrimack School District.
Okay, it's at our sole discretion. It's not like there's still somebody tied to that estate?
No, it's not.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, the only caveat, because John Listoka, I believe I pronounced his name correctly, was kind enough to give me a copy of the will. The only provision is, like Mr. Mower said, that if that building ceases to be used for educational purposes, educational is a pretty broad term. I think the Historical Society is a very valid educational purposes. We see, in the future, kids from MES, Reed, Thornton's, whatever, high school, going to visit the Historical Society when it's up and fully operational and becomes like a little gem of this town. Some of the pictures that I've seen in, people's desk drawers and whatnot are just truly amazing. The presentation that Chuck made with John Listoka, a PowerPoint showing the moving of the building and everything like that. I mean, it just blows you away. So I think that's still an educational purpose. But if we sell it and make it a 7-Eleven, then we'd have to pay Dartmouth College $10,000. So that's the only caveat. So in the hands of the Historical Society, it's safe. What Chuck's talking about is to doing something in memoriam that'll continue on that, and it would have to be a warrant article to create an expendable trust from, let's say, surplus from the school district approved by the board.
Yes, Naomi.
For those less familiar with the history of the town, what years and timeframes are we talking about here for the original?
For the original gift,
Yes.
the original gift rests in the will of Robert McGaw as it was conveyed to the town in 1948. And the town has simply been carrying the $10,000, if you will, in the operating budget. So all we would be doing would be taking it from the operating budget and putting it in the hands of the trustees of trust funds, and honor the gift, if you will, of Robert McGaw, as we have so many of our predecessors in Merrimack that have valued education and set up those kinds of trust funds.
Chuck, I think it's great that you're even paying attention to something like that. So thank you, and I think it's a great idea. I mean, I don't know if that's something that we can put into place here, or we just have to make a recommendation, but, I mean, it seems like that's a great use of that money.
Well, we can do a couple of different things. We can discuss it and see if there is a consensus amongst the board relative to its worthiness, or somebody could make a motion that we request that the school board consider and undertake such a thing.
I'll make that motion, absolutely. I don't know what I need to do that. I'm still a little new, but. So move.
Do we have a second?
Thank you, Carol.
Do we have any further discussion? Naomi?
I like the idea very much, and I'd like to see it go forward in conversation, and I'd like to see us pass it to the school board to talk about. I think that I'm interested in seeing the year's budget and what other warrant articles they are before I'd have a final opinion on it, but I'd like to see the conversation move forward in the meantime.
Well, of course, this is only a recommendation from our committee to have the school board consider and undertake such a concept. So it bears no weight other than an advisory influence. Carol?
Have you or Matt or anyone had any discussion with any members of the school board to get any sense of their thoughts on this?
I have not.
You, Matt? No?
No.
Okay.
But the idea arose out of a larger question that I hope we can discuss further about capital reserve funding and warrant articles. So that's why I brought it up tonight as a kind of an introduction to our considering requesting further warrant articles from the school board. More discussion? Well, then I'll call for the vote with a show of hands. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? Pat, the recorded count is? Then it is a recommendation of the board for the consideration of the school board. Now, we want to save as much money as we possibly can. And we spend a lot of money. There's no question about that. We are, however, I think the largest employer in the town of Merrimack. So it's understandable that we spend a lot of money. We have a very, very large operation taking place here. And we don't have a lot of the revenue mechanisms that the town has. We rely pretty much on the property tax for our funding. And we also know that the state legislature is continuing to squeeze us to the point that we receive less and less in state aid and financial support. And it has been causing a pinch, and it's going to continue to cause a pinch. So we as a budget committee, what can we do to save money? I mean, other than telling the townspeople what they think they should have to do without. So I think a positive way for us to save money is to encourage the school board to undertake more capital reserve funding. Because when we have a surplus and we are required to return it as a surplus, it goes into the general fund of the town. Yes, it's applied against the school portion of the property tax rate, but the town has an ability to manage that larger pool of money along with their own revenues, which is the general fund of the town. We don't have that luxury. So if money has already been voted on by the residents of the town of Merrimack to support education, and we return a surplus, it's already been raised and appropriated. So if we had capital reserve funding, we would be able to capture some of that money and not return so much to the general fund of the town of Merrimack. So we'd be essentially raising and appropriating money for our interests once, instead of having to get the money, return the money, and ask for the money again, to put it simply. So there's a tremendous advantage. And we take a look at the capital improvement program here, and there certainly are other considerations. We've heard this evening that the needs of our school district are climbing, and the financial needs are climbing if we are to meet any of the goals of the school district, the school board, in providing these goods and services for our students. So I'm proposing that we have a number of capital reserves that we could ask the school board to undertake and return some of that surplus to us so that it's to our advantage and smooth out our experience. For instance, there's only a very small amount of money left in the capital reserve fund for roofs, if I'm not mistaken. And had we put in, so we returned $5 million last year, I think? You know, had we put in a designated percentage of that surplus into our roofing fund, that would have smoothed out our experience in having to replace that $1.5 million roof. And the same is true, of course, of so many things. So I think that we should, quite frankly, as a school district, have a capital reserve fund for roofs, which we already have, paving. Is that capital reserve still in effect, Matt?
Yes, there's a small amount in there, but it's still active, yes.
Yes. So those are the only two we presently have. We should have a capital reserve account for our new SAU central office building that was proposed, my goodness, 12 years ago?
Oh, I saw it on a document from 1999 on a capital improvement plan.
You know, it was necessary then. It only failed by a short amount of money, or a short number of votes, to meet the 2/3 threshold, which I guess now is a
60?
is a 60% threshold, as the district clerk informed me, Pat Heinrich, our district clerk. So yes, we definitely need to start putting away a little bit of money, a little bit. We can't take all the surplus and apply it, but we can have warrant articles that take a small percentage of the surplus and put it into these categories that we know we are behind on, and we know are going to confront us at some point. And we're not going to be able to meet any of these goals at all if we don't start this kind of a little savings account in capital reserve funding for the school district. Now, there is one other type of capital reserve fund. Incidentally, I think we should have a capital reserve fund, as I said, for paving, for roofing, for our SAU central complex. I think we should have a capital reserve fund for our master campus engineering plan that we know is going to produce needs to be fulfilled at some point in the future. We should start saving for that now. Oh gosh, there are so many things the school board could state as a specific purpose for capital reserve funding. And then on top of that, we should have a capital reserve fund simply for our general education fund. And I'm going to ask Matt, who is a proponent of capital reserve funding, and he has made recommendations in the past, and I think we're prepared. I think, I know I am, and I'd like to think that the board is, to take advantage of this kind of smart savings in smoothing out the experience as it unfolds in front of us very quickly here in the future of Merrimack. So Matt, would you like to perhaps give us a more thorough understanding of our opportunities to save money through capital reserve funding, and most notably of which the account that would be under the auspices of the Department of
Department of
Education?
Ed, yeah. Yeah, in the past, when I first arrived here, when I had more hair and it was a lot darker, there were capital reserve accounts set up for paving, for roofing, for asbestos removal. We got that done finally, but there was a lot of those set up. Over the years, we have drained those to fill needs, and we haven't replenished them, probably in a good, I would say, 10 to 15 years. So at some point in time, it would be nice to get back into the normalcy that was, where people expected to see on the ballot, and there weren't large sums of money, they were just done over a period of 10 to 15 years, and it adds up. You know, $150,000 going into the roof repair capital reserve fund, $150,000 going into paving, maybe $50,000 going into building repair emergency fund, which we have. We've got two funds that have cash in them. We have the emergency repair fund in case we lose a boiler. And if you lose a boiler at one of these schools, that's a $500,000 bill right there, you know, because we replaced one at MES, and that school is only probably around 64,000 square feet, and it's not nearly as big as the rest of the schools. And that was $400,000 right then and there. That was a budgeted item. So if something goes, we have at least that safety net. We also have a special education fund, which has around $550,000 in it, in case there's an out-of-district tuition placement that comes in that's really expensive, that we hadn't planned for, that we hadn't budgeted for, and it has the potential to put us into a deficit situation. So we have those two. We have, it's called a remedial reading and math fund, which is around $88,000, that was done years ago in case Title I monies dipped and went away. That was kind of a little safeguard, but we haven't funded that in a while, and Title I's been fairly steady. But the one that Mr. Moore was talking about last is when you work for a town and you're getting ready to set the tax rate, you can tell your Department of Revenue auditor how much of your surplus, let's say the $8,163,000, let's say I'm not a school district, I work for a town right now. I would look at that, and the DRA auditor would say, how much of that do you want to retain? And I could, on the spot, make a pronouncement, I want to retain $2 million of it. They'd say, okay, well, you have $5 million already retained, so you want to add an additional 2. And my answer would be yes, I want to do that. And that, towns do that for very, very, very valid reasons. A lot of it has to do with cash flow. Back 20, 30 years ago, when the economy was really lousy, and when the economy gets lousy, when you book a tax warrant, you don't collect 100% on it. You're lucky sometimes if you get like 70%, so you're short on cash. So that helps you out with your cash flow. It also helps you out if you have any unforeseen emergencies. And if you do, you have to ask permission to spend that money, because you can't spend legally without all sorts of waivers more than what your appropriation says you can spend. So that's another purpose. But you can take that money and you can use it to stabilize the tax rate. So right now, with the $8 million, we would have to, as a school district, although towns never had to do that, it's fun. I'll tell a little story. When I first started working for a school district, my auditors came up to me and they says, "Matt, you got a surplus." I says, "Great. I think I want to retain some of that because I don't see any retainage here." And my auditor, Steve Plodzik of Plodzik & Sanderson, says, "Matt, you can't do that." I says, "What are you talking about? I can't do that. I've been doing that for 10 years." And Hook said, "I can't do that now because I'm Jim and Jeffrey Ringe." He says, "No, you can't because you're a school." "Okay, where does it say so?" He says, "It doesn't say it at all, but you just can't do it." So I get on the phone to the Department of Revenue Administration. I talk to Meg Baker up there. I says, "Meg, what are you doing to me? I can't retain surplus." She says, "No, you can't because you're a school." So I was exceedingly frustrated with that, and a long time ago. So in the last probably 15 years, they passed a law that allows school districts the ability, by virtue of having a warrant article on the ballot, that will allow us to retain up to, I think it's 5% of the net assessment, the amount of money that we raise after revenues. So let's say that's $60 million. So we could retain up to 5% of that. So that would be $3 million that we could. But that would be subject to a conversation with the school board. It just wouldn't be us sitting in the office saying, we want to retain 5%. That would be a conversation for the school board to have publicly, like I believe the town does with its retainage that it does. And so that would be something that, we could use. And then at the end of the year, we could apply some of it towards the tax rate to smooth out the peaks and valleys like the town has the ability to do with their tax rate. So if their tax rate's like 5.25 and it's going up to 5.45 and they want to knock off 20 cents, and if they release $750,000 worth of surplus towards that tax rate, they knock off 20 cents, so now they have an even tax rate. We could do the same thing if we had the ability. We don't have the ability. And when I see an $8 million surplus like this, it really that's the largest surplus I've ever had, right, due to the circumstances that we just went through. I look at that and say, oh my gosh, I wish I would have had that warrant article in place to allow us to retain some of it to hold on to for the purpose of future tax rate stabilization. Because if this year is a normal year, we're not going to have that $8 million next year to offset the taxes. So now you've gone from a dip, and now you're going to go to a spike, even if we give the board and the budget committee and the voters a level funded budget, because the surplus isn't there to offset the tax rate. Okay. And so that's why I think it's really important that the board, consider perhaps putting a warrant article on.
We've excited a question from Brian.
Yes, sir.
So definitely see the value in having some rainy day funds to avoid putting ourselves into fiscally irresponsible situations where we start having to go to extraordinary measures. But in terms of the leveling the tax rate, what would you see as being a reasonable time horizon to hold funds in retaining funds to offset a tax rate in a future year?
Well, reasonably, if you pass a warrant article, right, you could, that would take into effect the next fiscal year. So anything, I believe, I haven't got a legal opinion on this, anything coming from this year's budget, 21-22, I believe I could retain a certain amount and put it aside after the vote, but that wouldn't take place until after we close the books and before we set the tax rate. So that would take place sometimes in October.
So the gist of where I was trying to go with my question, and recognizing the complication of taking out bonds as a school district, given current financial market conditions and interest rates being effectively zero, would we be looking out for the best interest of the taxpayers by retaining surplus funds in the interest of offsetting the tax in a future year versus using a bond in the event that we have a change in tax burden to level it out? Because with interest rates basically being zero, that money is not well served sitting in any type of even investment account over 1 year, let alone 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, interest rates that we get from the retainage that we have from surplus.
It's basically nothing.
Well, we get a little bit better than nothing, but, you know, we get probably $80,000 a year, which is basically nothing. Yeah,
It's
right.
adjusted for inflation.
Correct.
The real return is sub-zero.
Yes.
So the money in real terms is actually diminishing if it's sitting in an account to be used in a future year. So in terms of, while I recognize the benefit of leveling the tax rate, and I recognize the difficulties of issuing bonds to do the same thing, in terms of the interests of taxpayers in Merrimack and the fiscal interest of the school district, I do wonder if holding substantial sums in retainage for multi-year periods is necessarily a great strategy, given the current market environment. Now, if we were talking about an environment where interest rates start going back up, and we're talking about 4 or 5% interest rates, then now, yes, holding the money in retainage instead of doing a bond would be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody sees that on the horizon in the foreseeable future.
Yeah. Once you take, if you have a warrant article that allows you such, at the end of, you can retain the money, let's say, you know, for 22-23 to offset the tax rate. And if you put some towards the tax rate, you could do that. And then whatever is left over has to be returned to the general fund every single year. So, and then you could retain another to bring you up. So you have to, it's not like the town where, town has around $10 million in retainage right now. They're holding that money. They can keep that money and they don't have to return any of it to reduce taxes. They can keep it there. With us being a school district, we can retain it and we can use a portion of it to reduce the tax rate if there's a spike, but at the end of the year, it all has to go back to reduce taxes, and then we have to go through the whole cycle again. Not with a warrant article, because once we pass the warrant article, it gives us the authority, but we have to go through this odd mechanism of returning everything that we have and then appropriating it or re-encumbering it, however you want to say it. I don't want to use the word appropriation because that's not proper. We'd have to do that all over again.
Understood, but nonetheless, even if
Nonetheless, right now, it doesn't make sense sitting in the bank at almost nothing interest.
well, and if we put $500,000 into, if we retain $500,000 from 1 year to the next, and then we credit the retainage, and then we put a new debit for $500,000 in it, we did some accounting tricks, but we still held $500,000 in the account. At the end of the day, the balance of the account doesn't change from year
Yeah.
to year. So my concern is if we're looking at leveling the tax rate, if we have 4 or 5 good years in a row where we're holding this money to level in a future year, I understand that the benefit of that, but also how much money are we talking about and how much money are we ultimately costing all of us as a group by holding that money in an account that's returning real interest rates that are sub-zero.
Obviously, I don't have the answer to that right now.
Carol?
Yeah, it seems to me there's a couple of different issues here. As far as the capital reserve funds that already exist that we've just kind of not made use of in the recent past, all we'd have to do as far as those go is build that into our budget come our budget season, to deposit whatever we say, $100,000 into each of those, or whatever amount we chose to do.
Yeah, you would have to create a warrant article to do such.
Right.
And in those particular accounts, in order to utilize them, you have to have a warrant article to take the money out.
Right, but my point is that we're not even having to wait for the school board to take any action. The capital reserve funds exist. We have to just create the warrant article to fund it. Obviously, the school board gets a vote as to whether they...
Well, the board creates the warrant article.
Oh, okay. It doesn't originate from us. I was thinking it was originating from us.
No,
All right, that's where I was missing the boat. Okay.
yeah.
And then the other piece would be if we wanted to create new capital reserve funds, that would be definitely in the board's purview to do that.
Correct.
And also it would be in their purview if they wanted to do what you were suggesting as far as retaining surplus.
Yeah.
Whatever. So for the most part, all the budget committee can do is make recommendations and respond, but we can't really take any action on it.
Exactly.
All right.
My position on this is that as a budget committee, we're trying to do everything we can do to save money, particularly money that's already been raised and appropriated and given to us by the support of the voters. You know, the old Yankee adage is if you watch your pennies, the dollars take care of themselves. These are all tools that have been legislatively given to us, whether it's legislated by the state or whether it's legislated by the school board. These are all tools that can help us. And my position is that we should test all of these to the extent that they can benefit us in some way. Obviously, it's the school board that is going to make a decision about all of these warrant articles. I'm just suggesting that as a budget committee, we try to inspire and reinvent what we know once worked well for us. And even if it's to experiment with the tax rate capital reserve fund, the legislature has created it for us to use. As meager as it may be, we need to find every penny we can in the state of New Hampshire for education. So that's why I brought all of this up. The ultimate debate will be at the school board level. But I'd like to find some consensus relative to giving the administration our support for pursuing these kinds of savings vehicles. Naomi.
One comment and one question. Matt, I know we can't see each other directly, but we can hear each other, so it works. And Brian, regarding what you were saying, my sense is that mathematically you're spot on. However, school districts are cumbersome, and it takes time to bring change, it takes time to raise money, and we have no control over what people will do 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line. So it seems to me that the capacity to save and make that money available becomes fiscally responsible in some ways simply because one would have it and be planning towards something that would be needed. I'd have to give more thought to just where that balance is with what you brought up. I think what you brought up is very valid, but I think that ability to plan has its own merit as well. Question for Matt, and I know you can't answer this entirely, but it's been some years. What happens every year? In other words, why is this something that tends to stall in your experience, as opposed to being something that does move forward?
Where is the snow we had last winter?
Yes, exactly.
Well, you know, it all, when you're, a couple of years ago, we did fund the emergency repair capital reserve fund for another $150,000 to get it up to $500,000. And then last year, due to COVID, they were like, the operating budget was on the warrant article, and there was, I believe, a support staff contract on the warrant, and that was it. It was a simple year. That's it. Nothing outrageous. Nothing that we didn't absolutely positively have to do. And so that was the philosophy back then. But where have these gone? They just haven't. They've been depleted, and they haven't been filled back up yet. They're just sitting there right now, and it hasn't been the motivation of the board or the philosophy of the board to look at them and to refund them, because for a while we were doing a roof, pretty much every single year for a bit, so why fund the reserve accounts if you're just going to spend it the following year? That kind of made sense. But now we had a break where we haven't done a roof in like maybe 4 or 5 years, and it would have been nice to have funded a roofing capital reserve account during those years where we weren't doing roofs. Or maybe we look at the CIP and we think really long term, and we keep doing the roofs until it gets to, I'm not going to be here, Bill, 2030, 2031, when we have a gap of 5 and 6 years. Maybe that's when we start putting money in the capital reserve account. Or maybe 29, 30, when we just have a little tiny section at MHS, supposedly. Maybe that's when we start doing it. Or in the year 23, 24, which is our last bond payment for the middle school, which is going to save us $800,000, maybe that's when we wait until 24, 25, because that's when that will no longer have that debt obligation. So you could fund capital reserve accounts then. I don't know what the question is. I don't know what the answer is. We're just putting it out there on the table and having a really good spirited conversation about it, and I enjoy this kind of conversation, this kind of talk back and forth, to see where you're at and to see where everybody's at with it.
Yes, Brian.
So again, differentiating between capital reserve funds to manage emergency situations versus for savings vehicles. I think my concern with capital reserve funds as saving vehicles, fully recognizing everything that Naomi said, sometimes it can be difficult to make things move and sentiments can change, but in recent years, the Merrimack voters have been pretty consistently strong in being supportive of education in Merrimack. And in spite of periodic efforts to sway them to the contrary, and I believe part of the reason they have shown that support is a trust that both the Budget Committee and the school board are being good stewards of their tax dollars. And what my concern would be is that if they see us as ferreting away money for a future time, that would be damaging to that trust and would potentially lend weight to those who would argue that we shouldn't fully fund education, and that it would actually be deeply counterproductive to the best interests of the school district in the long term. So recognizing what the market conditions are, recognizing that banks right now, banks for the last several years, are desperately looking for any way they can not to hold money, because holding money is losing money. With that in mind, again, if we were talking about a changing landscape where we saw interest rates starting to actually rise substantially, I think it would be a very different conversation. But even with talk of interest rates rising, I don't think we're talking about interest rates going above 3% in the foreseeable future. And if that changes and all of a sudden interest rates spike and we start talking about, 1980s interest rates of 10%, then yes, absolutely, we should be talking about holding on to some of that money because it will be in the best interest of the taxpayers that we hold it and that we don't need to talk about going to the bond market and paying 10% interest rates. But when interest rates are, again, in real terms, interest rates are negative right now, it concerns me a little bit to talk about putting money into savings for beyond contingency scenarios.
Anybody else? Oh, Carol.
One thought I have, thinking retrospectively, in the past, when we've put a warrant out to add whatever, 100,000, 150,000 to these capital reserve funds like roofing or, special ed or whatever we've done, they've overwhelmingly passed. I've never seen any pushback from the voters as far as that. Now, if we were squirreling money away for some unknown hypothetical, that I think we might get a very different reaction to. But if we can show we have these projects coming online in a couple of years, and here we're just trying to spread the cost over several years rather than being hit all in one year, I think the voters have overwhelmingly supported that, and I suspect they would continue to.
The only capital reserve fund that I've seen fail was $150,000 to put into capital reserve for the construction of a new central office.
That's right.
Because people use the argument, why don't we just vote on it as opposed to saving for it?
Right.
So then the following year, we came back with a warrant article for $1.5 million to build a new central office, and that failed too.
Right.
And that was the end of the central office talk.
Right, but the normal perennial roofing or paving, those we've always gotten support in
They
a
always did,
very
yes.
generous fashion.
Mhm.
Well, I recall when I was a younger man, I read of the Buffalo Creek flood disaster caused by the Pittston Company. And it wiped out all the people that lived below the ash dam that retained the water from the coal industry. And it was the first time that the corporate veil was pierced and made directors accountable and liable for those kinds of losses. And I particularly remember one old fellow who had lost just about everything, and they wanted an accounting of what it was he had lost. And he said, I lost my tree. And he said, well, we'll replace your tree for you. He said, you can't replace that tree. I don't have another life to live to wait for that tree. Personally, I have seen 15 years evaporate in front of me when it comes to any real leadership vision for the school district in the town of Merrimack. My personal opinion. Been around long enough to see it all, participate in it all. I've been through the school board wars. I've been through a great deal. And I don't have another life to live to wait for a real shot at getting some of these things that we need. You realize if we weren't a municipal corporation, that they would shut down that SAU building tomorrow? Are we really so ethically and morally bankrupt that we haven't addressed that issue since the last time it was put on the warrant? And apparently somebody just threw up their hands and said, well, we took care of that. Meanwhile, we have employees working under the stairs. We even hire short people to work down there, specifically so they won't hit their head. I'm tired of the of the silence, I guess, myself. I don't know, maybe I should be addressing this in public comment rather than as the chairman. But I'm tired of it all. I don't have another life to live, to wait to see these real needs ever be realized. And the only power I have is the little bit of voice that I have and a few crazy ideas about trying to save a nickel. Do you realize that the USS Constitution was saved by school children giving their pennies? And now it's restored, and it's the oldest commissioned ship in the United States Navy. Don't we really value anything anymore that we won't try giving every penny we can to meet that goal, to put our shoulder to the wheel and do those things, as opposed to just ignoring them for lengthy periods of time until a new generation suddenly is born and they come up with a novel idea? You know, we probably should build a new SAU building, or any of these other improvements that for years and years and years kept being deferred out. Maybe I should explain that the capital improvement program very often is considered by most people as some kind of a wish list. Oh, wouldn't this be nice in a real world that we could live in with rainbows and unicorns? And that's not what a capital improvement program is. Capital improvement program is part of our regulatory management of our community within the little power that the legislature gives to us. It's why we have zoning. It's why we have planning. It's why we have community development. It's why we can go to court and support those things when somebody wants to build some kind of mega monster in town. Because the capital improvement program is a part of that administrative management of our community. This is a real document, and it really means something. I'm sorry if I'm just kind of like going off on a tangent, as most people would think, but this is the reality of the situation. Call me old-fashioned. I know this is a bedroom community in many respects. People come and go, and they live in the great comfort that the town of Merrimack provides for them. But we are different. We ran for public office. We ran to make a difference and participate in our community. We have a responsibility that is a higher standard relative to the vision of what kind of community we want to live in. And so I'm just saying that we have a wonderful administration here that is exceptionally well paid, and they are capable of carrying out these kinds of undertakings to the school board, who will then make their own decisions about these things. But I think it's prudent on our part to do everything we can for every last penny we can possibly muster, given that the walls are closing in around us. And I refuse to go quietly. Shane. No.
I got a thought. So I'm on the, that's loud, Planning and Budgeting Committee as well, Planning and Building. And we went over, the master plan. And, I was pretty fired up about it. I'm like, hey, we got this master plan, and I was thinking this stuff happened all the time. And, so I asked, I'm like, hey guys, how long? And they're like, we never get anything done, right? We just talk about it, just like you're saying, Chuck. And then I hear, we have this massive surplus, and we were able to get Chromebooks for all the kids because we had all this extra money, and it was a good opportunity to do it. That propelled us with our technology goal, and we didn't even know it was going to happen. So I'm looking at, Brian, I'm not smart enough to do all the numbers and figure out how much we'd save if we gave it back, but, we're talking about, building an SAU. We're talking about getting rid of this red building. We're talking about, the master plan. We're talking about paving. If we want to get some of this stuff done, it's not going to pass doing it the same way we've been doing it for the last 20 years. So, we could take this opportunity to propel ourselves. I mean, the SAU building, I heard a $4 million number. The master plan, and I haven't seen this, and, I heard $1.5 million. So we're talking about, if we take 5% of our budget, we could take $3.5 million and actually get some of this stuff done. I know we can't make that decision, but I agree, Chuck. I mean, this seems like the time to actually get some stuff done.
Carol?
Yeah, Matt, can you clarify for me, haven't we already missed the boat as far as trying to preserve this surplus that we already have?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, so that's gone.
That's gone.
That boat sailed.
Yes.
So the only thing we could do would be proactively to recommend to the school board that they look at either adding money to the existing capital reserve funds or creating new ones or doing the other thing that you were saying about retaining surplus. We could make those recommendations, but there's nothing we can do with the existing surplus.
That's correct, Carol.
Right, okay.
I'm sorry, when in our meeting last week, I thought there was still an opportunity to put a warrant up to the school board.
Oh, there absolutely is, but it's not going to affect that number that you see there.
Okay.
That number is gone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry if I gave that impression.
No, and that's just me being naive with that.
No, it's
but
not,
in
yeah.
general, the capital, let's start thinking about, to your point, Chuck, of actually doing stuff, as opposed to just, definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. We are insane to expect a different outcome if we do it the same way. I'll get off my soapbox now.
So to put in for a warrant article to keep that 5%, that has to be done before the budget year? I'm a little confused there.
That would have to be done as a part of the budget process that we're going to start to go through. The one that's going to, the last day for warrant articles is February 8th, I believe.
So then you
So-
don't know how much surplus you're going to have.
No,
just
you're not.
hoping- And okay, I got it.
Yeah,
I got
so
it.
that's why it's usually a percentage, and it's up to the board, and the board has to make a decision, so it's in public. Excuse me, Carol? I didn't hear you.
Would that be a petitioned warrant article, or how would that work?
Well, the warrant article should, if it's looked upon favorably by the school board, come from the school board.
Okay, all right. I was just trying to figure out which way you were looking at going at that. All right, thank you.
I'm not looking at,
Yeah.
I'm just providing
Yep,
information.
okay.
It's my intention to encourage the school board to create capital reserve funding for the things that are necessary. And there are any number of them, as were enumerated both by our superintendent of finance and enumerated by our own capital improvement program. To Ellen's question, obviously, we're encouraging our school board to lead and to manage with acumen. Well, for every missed opportunity, an opportunity will arise annually, if you will. But a warrant article can also be petitioned by a certain number of citizens. I don't think that's the preferable way to manage our educational district, but it's perfectly appropriate if somebody wants to create a warrant article and petition it. That's perfectly within their power to do so.
But it wouldn't affect this money right now.
No, it doesn't affect this money at all, but it will affect whatever surplus we return at the end of the upcoming budget year, because we're required to return a surplus. So whatever budget we have, if we budget $80 million and we have a $3 million surplus or a $2 million surplus, then we can have these warrant articles that apply a small percentage of that surplus to these kinds of upcoming projects that we know we're going to have to fund, and they save over time. So it's entirely up to the school board. I think what I'm asking for is this robust discussion, first and foremost, but also for some sense of the crowd to deliver to the school board our support for that kind of management. They are the only ones that can undertake it. Yes, Scott?
Chuck or Matt, I'm in favor of taking some of the some of the surplus at the end of the year, provided that the voters have said, yes, let's do that, and applying it into something capital improvement. My question is, you've named at least 5 different capital reserve funds. Does one warrant article cover all of them?
No.
No, they have to be, back in the old days, you could have that, but right now they have to be for a very specific purpose. So it would have to say paving capital reserve, it would have to say roofing capital reserve. If you wanted to create a new one for technology, it would have to say technology capital reserve. They have to be for a very specific purpose.
And so,
So you get rid of the games that used to be played with. these
okay,
days.
and so the maximum you said is 5%. I wrote that
No,
down
no,
somewhere.
no. That was for the retaining surplus article that's not for a particular purpose, it's for tax rate stabilization.
Okay.
The other one is, you can, if you wanted to do something with, let's say, a roof, it would be, to raise and appropriate the sum of $150,000, said sum coming from the unassigned fund balance of 21-22, not to exceed, you could do 50% of the fund balance or 10% of the fund balance, so you would be giving back some, but it would be up to $150,000. That's as
Okay.
high as you could go. You have to name a sum certain.
Okay, so the max on that would be like 150,000. That's
Or-
what I'm
Or
understanding.
whatever one would choose.
Okay, or whatever the article says.
Yes.
Okay, and then you have one for each, so paving
one.
and roofing and all that stuff.
Correct,
Thank
sir.
you.
Shane?
This massive surplus that we're talking about, I'm gonna contribute it to the COVID factor, as like we've talked about. Do we have the COVID factor coming into this year as well? Are we gonna run into it, not this big of a surplus, but we are also gonna have a bunch of money sitting at the end of this year?
I think so, because of the shortage in substitutes. Bill has a better hand on the personnel currently right now than I do. I still think we have a shortage in paraprofessionals, et cetera.
So-
there is, I don't think it's gonna be like this, but it may be like 4 million,
So this could be one of our last times to actually capitalize on
Yeah.
a massive surplus, so we should think about that. I mean, we
Perhaps.
missed this boat, we missed this, let's not miss the next one.
But haven't we already missed the boat for this coming one? Oh, the next one, yeah,
The
absolutely.
next
yeah.
one, because we're still short-staffed, yeah.
Excuse me just a minute. Right here. If I may, we by law cannot exceed our budget. Asking for a supplemental budget is just, you don't do that. It's so unbelievably difficult. So we are required to return a surplus. When this is a budget that we come up with, not really a contract, but a budget. So we know it's probably going to be more than 81 million bucks by the time we're done. So it requires careful management. Administration has done a wonderful job of bringing it right down to the line. Every financial decision they make is one to make sure that we get to the end of the school year and have a surplus. So we hire teachers, for instance. We make decisions about whether we want a really experienced teacher or whether we want a less experienced teacher, because it's a financial decision. And through that careful management, we wind up with a little bit of surplus at the end of the year. And $3 million is quite a target on an $81 million budget. I mean, we all experience this at our kitchen table as well. If we think something's going to be budgeted for the month, and we go, gas for the month. Oh boy, it's going to be probably $200. Well, we better make sure that we have enough budgeted that we don't need an extra 3 miles of gasoline because it ain't going to be there for us. But if we go, well, you know, I'm not going to go as far here, and I'm not going to do as many things there, and I know that'll cover me. At the end of the month, you know, you've got $50 left over, and you go, wow, I did really great this month. That's a surplus. What am I going to apply it to? I'm going to apply it to all the other things that I need, because if I went over, wow, it'd be the end of the world. In a larger sense, a municipal corporation is a complicated machine that is exceptionally well managed by our administration. We have every confidence in them that they will give us the kinds of tools that are necessary. We're just asking as townspeople, I think, to say, hey, this is what we would like to see happen. We'd like to see this kind of acumen and this kind of management applied to our district to help us in these very difficult times, because education funding has been a problem for 40 years and is continuing to be a problem. The state is exceptionally parsimonious, and this scares the taxpayers at the local level. We all know the inadequacies. We all know the inequities. And so here at the local level, as a budget committee, I think we have an opportunity to make a recommendation, put it in the hands of our administration, and say, please, beg our case to the school board to accept these kinds, or take a fresh look at these kinds of tools and see if they are going to work for us here in Merrimack. Naomi, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Oh, no, that's fine. So, Brian, what you said earlier was very convincing to me. I want to put a different spin on this. Chuck, it seems to me that what you're trying to do is two things. There's both the vehicles you're talking about and the fiscal needs, but you're also trying to change the conversation in a way that I like, in that rather than us meet and go home and wait until the budget comes to us and then talk about it, create a dialogue at this point in time between the priorities of the board, the priorities of the members of this committee, and begin that back and forth. And that I like a lot.
I had no idea I was doing that to you, Naomi.
You are
but
doing that.
That is precisely what I am trying to inspire our board to undertake, is a new opportunity and some new ideas and some new voices, and to have a more robust engagement between the school district budget committee and the school board. There has historically been conflict between those two bodies. Why? I don't know. Because we're the guys that are actually responsible. And I feel kind of strange. It's like it all comes down to me, because at deliberative session, I'm the guy that has to get up and defend the budget. Even though I have so very little control over the budget, I have to speak on behalf of all of you and defend a budget that could use more engagement between the school board and the budget committee to more fully embrace a cooperative, collaborative experience?
Yes. I don't know where I stand at the moment in terms of whether or not these are the right tool to use. There are things in favor or against. But I think that it is fair to inform the school board that this will be an important part of what we're discussing, and that it would be important for them to include their thinking on this to inform us as we go. At least that far makes sense to me, because we will keep talking about it. And so having their thoughts on this and why they choose to use it or not will be valuable to us.
Well, I think we're very grateful for the fact that the administration believes in these tools as well. And they will do what they can to counsel the school board into the tools that should be available to them, and to have a fresh look and discussion about them. Oh, excuse me, Carol. Brian?
So to reiterate, I'm not opposed to fully funding everything on the capital improvement plan. These are vital, many of them maintenance items, not even improvement items, are maintenance items if we really call them what they are. What I'm saying from my perspective is we look at the 25-26 and 26-27 roof repairs that are both for over $1 million each. And from a purely fiscal perspective, again, ignoring the political element of it, because there is a very significant political element to it of warrant articles that have to pass by 2/3 majorities, and I fully recognize that. But just from a purely fiscal perspective, I very strongly suspect that if we looked at the numbers, we would be better served to bond the $2.25 million to do those 2 years of roofs and do them next year on a bond, because again, because of interest rates, market interest rates are so low that we would be better served doing a bond and doing those next year, and then we already have the new roofs, versus putting away the money over 4 years given current interest rates. So again, I do recognize that bonded warrant articles need a 2/3 majority, and that is a politically fraught conversation. But just from a fiscal perspective, just purely looking at the fiscal angle of it, I see something to the tune of close to $5 million worth of roofs over the next 5 years on the CIP, 6 years on the CIP. And from a purely fiscal perspective, I would need to see the exact numbers, but I very strongly suspect, given market conditions, that we would be better served bonding the $5 million and doing it all now.
Carol?
Yeah, one problem, I think, unless I'm
Microphone, Carol?
one thing, unless I'm misunderstanding what you're suggesting, we can only bond for something we intend to do in the imminent future. So we can't bond 5 years worth of roofs, 5 years ahead.
Understood. No, but from what the conversations that I've been hearing from Matt for the last couple of years is, while these are on the CIP for 5 years out, they're actually due last year. So we're living on borrowed time for some of these, even though they're 2 or 3 years out, unless I've misunderstood what Matt has said.
No, you didn't.
We've kind of been rolling the dice, and so far we haven't crapped out, but we keep rolling the dice. The odds are going to catch up with us eventually. So again, Matt has said that we are taking reasonable risks. We're not pushing the envelope too far so far. But just from if we are looking at the options of how to handle it, we will, the taxpayers of Merrimack will pay less over a 5 or a 10-year horizon, paying for it through a bond right now, than putting it away into an investment account to pay for it all in a lump sum down the road. And we stop playing craps with the roofs each year and hoping that we don't run out of luck and have a roof that suddenly starts leaking.
I guess the way I'm looking at it is, well, for one thing, Tom Trousseau is very vigilant about walking those roofs at least once, maybe twice a year. And he's pretty good at spotting problems before they become crises. So I have some comfort level that we're not rolling the dice too aggressively. The other thing is, I think, and this is a personal opinion, I think that the roofs, the I am a little concerned from a fiscal perspective with the idea, it's one thing if we can get a deal right now because the prices are lower by doing a roof maybe 1 year before it's an imperative. I don't think I'd have a lot of heartburn over that. But doing a roof 4 to 5 years before it needs to be replaced, I have to think we'd lose more than we'd gain by taking that approach.
I mean, when you talk about any type of infrastructure, including roofs, you know, the paving on O'Gara Drive, I saw in there, it said, Matt, that it involves regrading the gravel.
Mm-hmm.
That means we're probably 5 years overdue on repaving that.
Oh,
right?
absolutely, yes.
If we had repaved it 5 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about taking the pavement up and regrading the gravel, right?
Right.
So when is it a need? Is it a need when, if we don't do it this year, then we're gonna start getting damage to the road bed, and now we have to strip it and regrade? Or is it a need when it's, now the potholes are getting so bad that we're risking serious damage to vehicles if we don't do it? Well, if we wait, we pay more in the long term,
Right.
right? So anytime we talk about infrastructure, there's always a, when is it really needed? Need is a relative term. And what I'm saying is not necessarily that we should look at bonding the next 5 years worth of roofs, but if we're talking about funding 5 years worth of roofs right now, given market conditions, we would likely be better served. And I would be very open to hearing numbers from even if they're estimates from the administration on what that would look like. But I suspect that we are probably better served. We talked about doing that sooner via the bond market than we would be by doing it by trying to save the money up in capital reserve over a multi-year window. Because even with good investment rates, even if the trustee of the trust funds can get 4% returns on a good year, 4% returns adjusted for inflation, we're talking about 1.5% versus if we do a bond, we're paying, I think you said 1.9% was what the current projection was for.
Yeah, the lease payment, we hit it
Okay.
at the right time. It was
Yeah.
1.55, but, you know, right now you're talking probably around 2%. It's
But
gone up a
still,
little bit, yeah.
2%
Right.
versus, we're paying 2% versus we're getting 4%
Yeah.
adjusted for inflation, it's actually a wash. So, given where things stand, it's, if we're talking about how to fund it of saving versus borrowing, the market favors borrowing right now.
I guess my thought process is, I don't consider myself enough of an expert when it comes to things such as roofing, paving, et cetera. I would like to see input from Tom Tussaud before we reach decisions, because I'm all for proactively staying on top of what needs to be done and not deferring things and adding costs. I'm not in favor of trying to get drastically ahead of the curve just because there might be some small financial savings as a result.
And my understanding from Tom Tussaud last year, and again, what I've heard Matt say every year I've been here is, we're well past getting proactively ahead of most of these things. We're already deferring them, and it's really the conversation is how much do we defer them? We're past being ahead of the curve on most of these.
Well, what I'm suggesting is that we encourage the administration to have these conversations with the school board. And when the school board takes these under consideration, I would love to have your comment and testimony at the school board meeting when we're actually discussing a warrant article for a specific purpose. Much of what you said may well be true, Brian and Carol, but it's not the purview of the Budget Committee. The purview of the Budget Committee is to say, hey, help us save some money with capital reserve funding. They will take it up as an item of discussion and determine which specific purposes may meet their goals and objectives and their vision. And then we will have an opportunity as citizens to comment on that when they're having a discussion. Right now, they're not having a discussion about anything. We are. And we're just the Budget Committee saying, hey, we think there's an opportunity for you to have a discussion on these things and utilize some of these tools to get us where we need to go. That's all I'm asking for on the part of the Budget Committee. not a specific purpose, although
Right.
obviously there are any number of things that could fall into the category of a helpful capital reserve fund. Oh,
Well-
Ellen.
Well, it's more just a comment, because you touched on what I was going to say, and we seem to be getting sidetracked on maintenance here that we know needs to be done, but there's so many other categories that Mark brought up, Chuck brought up, that the school board's not talking about, and Mark even said it hasn't been their focus for many years. So that's what we need to bring them to, is maybe we need some reserves and bonds so that we save the most money over time. Because there could be another technology crisis, another pandemic, and then we don't have enough money to homeschool our kids or remote school, things like that. So I completely respect what you're saying in regards to numbers, and thanks for doing all that math really fast, because it's not my thing. But I was getting out my calculator, but maybe it needs to be both, and they're not talking about it. I mean, I started to watch the school board in preparation a couple of years ago for potentially doing this. They don't talk about a lot financially that they should talk about, and they seem to get sidetracked on other things that I understand are important, but you can't just vote on things and pass them without thinking about where the money's coming from.
Carol?
Would there be any benefit, if the school board were inclined to go along with it, to having a joint meeting of the two committees?
I don't, personally, my experience with joint meetings over a good many years is that they're not as productive as simply collaborating
All right, well then,
through regular business channels.
given that, then how would you propose we put forward this suggestion to the school board?
Well, I'm going to turn to Naomi, and I think she is going to take a stab at something here.
I think we need a motion, and then we can move forward. I have a beginning one. It is very open to friendly amendments. It's meant to simply move us towards a motion, and the motion is that we ask the school board to consider vehicles such as a capital reserve funding and provide their reasoning or philosophy regarding their use.
Carol? Oh, wait a minute, we need a second for that. You're
Well,
seconding?
I'll second, and then I'll propose an
Okay.
amendment.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
As I said, that is initial wording.
Okay, so
Carol?
I was just going to suggest that you add, in addition
Closer.
to the comment about capital reserves, also to bring up the subject of, I can't remember the term now, the 5% surplus retention. I don't know what the real,
Surplus retention warrant article would
okay.
be
Th-
appropriate.
That might be added to your motion.
Brian?
I might propose, instead of consider, consult with the administration.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
So I was proposing, as opposed to asking the school board to consider those vehicles, that we ask them to consult with the administration on those vehicles.
That's a good one, Brian.
And any other friendly amendments?
Can you read it now, how we have it?
Okay. Okay, the motion is that we ask the school board to actively consult with the administration on the vehicle of capital reserve funding and surplus retention, and provide their reasoning or detail the philosophy to the budget committee. Vehicles should be plural. Got it.
Anybody else? Shall we call the question? All those in favor signify so by raising your hand. We have unanimity. I can't tell you how inspiring this conversation has been. I hope you have all found it exceptionally different, new, and worthwhile. I apologize that we seem to have just taken up a great deal of time. But I'm very happy about what we, I think, have accomplished. So if we could very quickly have our training talk from Matt, I think we could probably wrap things up. Oh, hang on just a moment. Excuse me. Carol?
I just wanted to clarify, after we pass that motion, how is that going to be transmitted to the school board?
This is the administration right here.
Okay, so you're going to give it to
Right.
them?
The liaisons could not be here
Right.
this evening for excusable reasons.
That was my concern.
And both Bill and Matt have assured me that they will carry all of our disparate thoughts and considerations for the consideration of the school board.
Okay, great.
Okay. Yes, Matt, please. Thank you.
Well, I was going to defer to Pat Heinrich because per our previous conversation, she was much inclined and looking forward to providing you with the proper training because of her expertise.
Can I ask a
In my sheer elation, I apologize, Pat.
So if we've already been through training, do we have to stay for it if you're going to that part? So we can be excused?
Yeah. Chuck, you have some things still on the agenda.
Chuck, Pat says you have something else.
Oh,
You have some things still on the agenda, sir.
Oh, gosh, where am I?
And while we have administration here, budget book pickup. That usually happens the first week of December, when you present your budget to the school board.
The
May
first
3rd.
week of what, Pat?
December,
Thank you, yeah.
yeah.
Usually goes, I think the budget's going to go whatever the first Monday in December is, the 6th, I believe. And so it usually gives us a couple days after that, pick them up at central office, it'll be all ready to go.
So we're looking at the week, you're meeting with them on the 7th?
Thank you.
If that's the Monday, yes.
That's the first Monday, so the week of the 14th or the end of the week?
Oh, no, the 9th, couple days after.
Okay, so budget
Yeah.
book pickup would be 8, 9, 10, probably
Yeah,
9, 10,
yeah.
okay?
If anyone who is comfortable with their level of satisfaction in membership, we'll adjourn the meeting, and anybody that would like to...
One more thing, sir.
What did I miss now? Oh,
The
public
liaison
participation?
requests. Anybody that's not staying for the training is leaving. That's your ticket out, is the liaison
Oh.
request to Chuck.
oh, so that means I can leave now?
Well, we haven't adjourned the meeting yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Mark?
it's Bill or Matt.
I mean, Matt, sorry. I
Yeah.
said Mark. I'm really sorry.
Mark, that's all right.
Whatever. It's
I
Paul
am
Mason wine.
Oh, is it really? Thank you, Paul Maison, it's French.
Oh, Paul Mason, yeah. But it's made in California,
It's made in
so.
I
California.
was just a given. Yeah, if you could pass in your liaison forms, and if you haven't filled them out and you want to fill them out later, that's fine.
Did you remember that, or did you Google it?
Orson Welles was the voice, and I knew that the name of the wine was a first, like a man's name.
fine. I'll take
And then I had to look that up to make sure, but yes.
They are.
There's
I know,
no-
very important.
There's no public participation this
Yes.
evening. There is no public. And we've, I think, had sufficient member comments. Anybody would like to make comment? Now is the time. If not, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Are you adjourning, or are you just
Adjourn.
training? Adjourning?
We're adjourning.
I'll move to adjourn.
All right. We stand adjourned.